This is Unit 1, Lecture 2. What is philosophy? In this lecture, we'll distinguish filial love from other types of love, wisdom from knowledge and belief, types of definition, and what it means to do and to study philosophy. The word philosophy comes from two Greek words, philia, meaning love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. But what does love of wisdom mean? Sometimes it's helpful to define something in part by what it's not. There are four words in ancient Greek for love: storge, eros, agape, and philia. Storge love, or in contemporary Greek, storgia love, is love from familiarity, for example, between a mother and a child. This kind of love isn't necessarily obvious. It's not physical, it's not jealous. Now compare this to eros love, or lover's love, which is usually intense and makes all kinds of physical demands, whether we give in to those demands or not. Eros love is jealous. It says it's just you and me and I don't want anybody else involved. Very different from storge love. Then there's agape love. We in Christian theology are familiar with this, even if we don't use the word a lot. This is God's love for us and the primary love that God expects us to have for each other. This love is not conditioned by its objects. Whereas in storge love, we love people we're close to, like our mothers, our best friends, our roommates, our pets. In agape, that's not the way it works. We're supposed to love everybody, regardless of who they are. Of course, it's not necessarily physical or psychologically intense, and it's certainly not jealous. Then there's filial love. Remember, this is the first part of the word philosophy. We think of this as friend love. You might want to look at C.S. Lewis's book, The Four Loves, in which he works all of this out nicely. He notes that filial love is not necessarily physical, although it can be. That's more of a cultural issue. Sometimes it can be pretty intense, but it doesn't have to be. And it's characterized primarily by a selfless interest in the well-being of the friend. It sounds a lot like agape, but with one difference. Agape is not conditioned by any particular person. We're supposed to feel agape love toward everybody. Whereas in philia, it's pretty rare that we have a friend for whom we are completely, selflessly interested. Note that this is the root word that's found in, for example, bibliophile and philatelist. So much for philia, the first half of the word philosophy. Now for the second half, the Greek word sophia, or wisdom. In Greek, wisdom, or sophia, is distinguished from knowledge and belief. One word for knowledge in Greek is episteme, which is like scientific knowledge. Now that's not a root that we encounter too often in English. Then there's another word for knowledge, gnosis, or intuitive knowledge. This is a root that we encounter often in English, in words such as agnostic, or prognosis, or diagnosis. And then there's a related word in Greek, doxa, which means belief. And we encounter this root in English words like paradox and doxology. So philosophy is love of wisdom, not in a storgal, erotic, or agape sense. Nor does philosophy love in the first place knowledge or belief. It loves wisdom. So again, what does love of wisdom mean? Well, what kind of definition are we looking for? There are at least four types of definition. An analytic definition replaces the word defined with a word or phrase of equal meaning. For example, a bachelor is an unmarried man. But I don't think we can come up with that kind of definition for philosophy, that philosophy equals something. I mean, if we say philosophy equals love of wisdom, that's not very helpful. A second kind of definition is dictionary. We simply look it up in a dictionary, which tells us how people happen to be using the word at the time the dictionary is written. But I don't think that will suffice for us. I don't think we want to know merely what the dictionary says. We would like to know what philosophy is, especially since you've taken the time to register for this course, and most of you have paid for this course. What exactly are you studying? A third kind of definition is stipulative. This is a definition by agreement. We take a vote and say, all right, let's agree that this is what this means for our purposes. So in woodshop, for example, the word plane means a tool for shaving wood. But if this were a course in avionics, the word plane would mean something different. I don't think that type of definition is good enough for our purposes. That will simply have us agreeing in advance on what it means. So what about this fourth definition, ostensive? Ostensive definition is defining by example and pointing until finally the person who's looking for the definition gets it. So if I wanted to define chipmunk to a little child, it probably would do me no good to use an analytic, dictionary, or stipulative definition. I would just have to point enough times to chipmunks and enough times to non-chipmunks so that finally the child would get it. Isn't this the best way then to define not only chipmunk to a child, but perhaps philosophy to people who aren't sure what it means? So I would suggest that of the 4 types of definition, ostensive is the most practical for our purposes. We know filial love when we see it or when we have it. We know, for example, what it means to call someone a book lover or a stamp lover in a sense that is not storgil, erotic, or agape. And we know people whom we would call knowledgeable but not wise, and people we would call wise but not knowledgeable. To love wisdom, then, is to pursue wisdom for its own sake, to promote it and celebrate it. Where knowledge is most valuable as a means to an end, wisdom is an end in itself. Beyond this, we'll seek our definition of wisdom in our study of philosophy as we go along. There's also a practical side. Philosophy at its best helps us to discover our own presuppositions. Why do we believe what we believe? Why do we value what we value? Philosophy helps us develop tools for study and for life. Philosophy helps us satisfy our curiosity and, somewhat paradoxically, makes us more curious. Philosophy keeps us humble, and philosophy makes us wiser. Thus, we may distinguish doing philosophy from studying philosophy. Socrates said that philosophy begins in wonder. Every time we wonder, we do philosophy. So we've been doing it almost all our lives, maybe even in utero. To study philosophy is to study critically other philosophers and the issues they raise, and to study ourselves and the issues we raise. The study of philosophy may take many forms. We can study it thematically according to one or more of the 5 major branches of philosophy. We can study it historically, or we could study a particular issue, such as the philosophy of love or the philosophy of sports. In our class, we're going to do a little bit of all these things. We're going to talk about an historical study, we're going to talk about a thematic study, and then we'll settle into 2 of the 5 major branches, metaphysics and epistemology. This is the end of this lecture. Next, we begin our look at the branches of philosophy, starting with metaphysics.